And the big moment that we have all been waiting for has now begun at the Supreme Court. The judgments are being read out. 3 judgments will be read out in the Aadhaar cases. The judgments have already begun. Justice Sikri is reading out the majority verdict of this 5-judge bench. Now, this includes the verdict of the Chief Justice, Deepak Mishra, and Justice Kavilkar in the judgment that he's reading. And this is what we have so far. The UIDAI is established as a statutory body providing authentication. All residents are eligible to get Aadhaar. It can't be reassigned to anyone as it is unique. Justice Sikri is still reading out from the majority view of the judgment. Now, to just explain to our viewers what this means, the judges are going to be reading out portions of what they feel are the important portions of their judgments. This could run into 500 pages or even more. There will be 3 different judgments that will be read out. This is the first of those 3 that are being read out by Justice Sikri right now. And we're getting live updates of it as it's being read out inside Supreme Court from our Supreme Court correspondent Meenakshi Banja, who's sending us these details. So we will have 3 judgments on Aadhaar, and we will not know what the final judgment is until we've heard all 3 of these judgments. I'm going to reiterate, we won't know what the final decisions on Aadhaar is unless we've heard all 3 judgments. And so far, we've only heard the beginning of the first, and the beginning of the first basically just describes what the UIDAI is. And we're going to keep bringing you more and more updates as of now. With me in the studio, Vinay Tiwari. I also have Ritesh Bhatia, Ramakant Gaur, and Raghu Godavar joining us on Skype. Vinay, the UIDAI is established as a statutory body to provide authentication. All residents are eligible. It cannot be reassigned. So this is what we already knew. This is just reiterating what we already knew. But here are the things that I find very interesting in this judgment set, and we're going to keep putting that back on the screen so that our viewers can see it if they've just tuned in. Providing authentication, and this was a point of debate from the very beginning, that if the UIDAI, if the Aadhaar was meant to authenticate who you are. So if I claim at a ration shop that I am Faye D'Souza, the Aadhaar can be used to authenticate the fact that yes, I am in fact who I claim to be. It should not be used as an ID card or an identification, which is different from authentication. And the fact that that is the first sentence of the judgment being read out so far, there might be a clue in there for us.
It may be. But I think it's very important that viewers understand it's a complicated judgment. It's going to be complicated because this judgment today has actually 29 petitions clubbed together. Yes. So there are several questions that were asked while many petitions were filed. And just in case people are still a little confused about why we are saying 3 judgments, maybe it's fair we explain it once again. It's a 5-judge bench, and because it's a 5-judge bench, in Indian legal system, judges are allowed to write separate judgments. 3 of them have decided to write one judgment, and 2 of them are writing separate judgments, and hence a total of 3 judgments out of the 5-judge bench. So that's why. So
we understand that Justice Chandrachud will have a separate opinion.
Justice Chandrachud, Justice Bhushan will have separate judgments, and the Chief Justice, Justice Mishra, Justice Khanvilkar, and Justice Sikri will have one judgment, which is what is being read out now.
And that's called the majority.
That's right, because 3 of them have written one, so that will obviously prevail over the others.
So what we need to find out now is whether, so it's effectively 3 against 2 to see what the other 2 have to say as well, and whether the other 2 are completely in opposite of the majority judgment, of the majority opinion here.
Yes, and the other thing that I think all viewers need to keep in mind is that there are many aspects in it. So it's not a yes/no verdict, or it's not a allowed, not disallowed verdict. It's a verdict which has many aspects. So you may well have certain parts being disagreed upon by judges, certain might be unanimous, or certain might be completely against the petitioners who raised various questions.
Let me just take our audience through what is being looked at now. It would be very simple to assume that the Supreme Court is just going to decide whether or not to throw Aadhaar out of the window. That's not what's happening. Here are the things that are actually being disputed in the Supreme Court that we're going to have opinions about. Whether whether there is a constitutional validity to the Aadhaar Act at all. Whether there is a problem of here the individual, there's a problem of data protection, there's a problem of whether Aadhaar should in fact be used compulsorily in bank accounts, which is something that has gone, one petition that's gone forward, whether it should be used for authentication, whether it can be used as a government identification, whether it should be made compulsory. There's a fairly long list here, Vinay.
Very long list, including issues of right to liberty, including issues of whether the government is converting itself into a surveillance state, whether you should include minor children in the Aadhaar scheme because they have no right to consent, and you are actually doing it without
babies,
to babies as well. You want babies as well. Plus, it has also gone to examine questions of data protection itself, and as you said, the implementation of the Aadhaar Act itself. I mean, the arguments have been made that the scheme has been extended. The Aadhaar Act only mandates this as an identity document, and it has now converted itself into a completely different animal altogether. So, very serious issues, including articles of the Constitution that allows us right to liberty.
Right. I'm just going to check and see. There's more stuff coming up right now. More updates coming in from Meenakshi. Minimum possible data obtained for Aadhaar. The purpose for enrollment of for the purpose of enrollment, number of documents are required. There's a fundamental difference with Aadhaar. It eliminates the chance of duplicacy. This is Justice Sikri as he continues to read out the judgment. Aadhaar is also to empower the marginalized sections of society. It gives them identity. Aadhaar satisfies the doctrine of proportionality, says Justice Sikri. So this, so far it does seem like the majority judgment is a largely pro-Aadhaar judgment, that seems to agree with the purpose or the reason why we have Aadhaar, or why the government wants to bring Aadhaar. And these, let me also point out that these are largely views held by the central government as well. These are views that the central government placed before the court in its arguments as well.
Yes, but I think, again, it's important to stress that we shouldn't look at it as an all or none kind of a judgment, because while the judgment does say that it satisfies the doctrine of proportionality, we don't know whether these specific provisions that have been questioned through various petitions will be accepted or struck down, or will be altered or modified in some way or the other. So I think that's something which is rather more relevant. For instance, while the court may agree with Aadhaar being satisfying all the criteria of the doctrine of proportionality, they may well say that you need to make the linking with, say, for instance, your phone number voluntary or something like that. So that can still happen. So I don't think it's an all or none verdict as yet.
Right. Let me bring in my panelists at this point. While we wait for more updates, we have Ramakant Gaur and I beg your pardon, Raghu Godavar and Ritesh Bhatia with us. Ramakant Gaur, this is an interesting argument, interesting arguments we've had so far. Multiple pleas have been clubbed together, including pleas that have come from employees of public sector banks who felt that they were being completely, they were being put out. We've had, questions that are being examined as to whether the Act of 2016 should have been introduced as a money bill, whether the citizens have a right to personal identity, inclusion of minor children, like when I was pointing out, concerns of data protection. So this is a massive, massive job here for, for the judges of the Supreme Court.
Undoubtedly, and that massive job continued for 38 days before a constitution bench. So second longest hearing in the history of Supreme Court of India. So 4 points were taken into consideration by and large, whether this is leading to surveillance state, whether this is the welfare or warfare, consent or coercion, whether your data is secure. So the technical arguments were looked into this, and then legal process, whether the bill was introduced rightly or wrongly, whether the parliament was bypassed in a particular manner. The bill, since the bill was brought for the purpose of entitlement, disbursement of certain facilities and other perspectives, and it has extended or expanded its base to security, to surveillance. That's something is to be looked into. So you are right in saying that it is not something which is discarding the Aadhaar or approving the Aadhaar. It has to, the judgment has to look into various perspectives and each perspective has to be addressed by the judges.
We have, in fact, Matthew Thomas with
So
us.
they were
Yes, who joins us out of Bangalore. He's a petitioner in this case as well. Mr. Thomas, many thanks for giving us time. I do know that you're going to be waiting for that judgment as well. From what we understand, the majority judgment is now being read out. What are your expectations specifically with your petition that you placed before the court?
With what little I have heard just now,
yes,
it appears that the majority judgment will somehow uphold it. The first mistake which I think which has been just read out is that the belief, these three judges believe that the duplicacy is eliminated. That is totally wrong. In fact, there are no duplicates, there are millions of false matches. If you try to authenticate a person with the entire database, you will find millions of false matches taking place. And that's an inherent defect in the system. Unfortunately, these judges seem to have believed that it will eliminate duplicacy. It does not. Secondly, I think it was mentioned that every resident, that's significant, every resident is entitled to this thing. What that means is every militant, every spy, every illegal immigrant will obtain this so-called Aadhaar card. And once he obtains it, it's his passport for everything else. We know that a Pakistani spy working in the embassy in Delhi obtained this so-called Aadhaar number. He opened a bank account, he linked it to somebody's LPG, and he got the subsidy. Illegal immigrants in Bangalore have given this thing, and the UIDA said that this is a genuine enrollment. Now that's the meaning of all residents are entitled to it. So you're entitling all kinds of people to it. And the control, the judges probably have not yet understood, they may sometime in the future, that the entire control of who enters the database, who is issued this number, rests with the foreign company. There are three companies who are contractors of the UIDI, L1 Identity Solutions, Accenture, and Mahindra Satyam Morpho. The ownership of this L1 has changed 3 times, and therefore these are the people who control who comes into it. And the danger is that this does not eliminate duplicacy, it cannot prevent any subsidy theft, it cannot do anything, it can be abused, and it will be and is being abused. I have got over 100 crimes committed. Not a single crime has been investigated. Here is a book written by me which contains information on 100 crimes.
Right.
Over 100.
Mr. Thomas.
I have just reported 100, there are many more. So it is something ridiculous, and I don't think the judges have understood it.
Mr. Thomas, it's so far from the information that we have.
We should refrain.
No, so far, and I just want to understand your specific petition that you placed before, the Supreme Court, that we understand is also being, will also receive its judgment today. What was your plea?
My plea was that the theft of subsidies, etc., must be investigated before you find a solution. My second plea was that the biometrics doesn't work, and therefore millions of people have been disenfranchised. They're made into people who have no civil existence at all. My most important plea was contractually the entire data is being handed over to foreign agencies, and that must be stopped. And in order to prevent any damage, the entire data must be destroyed, and the data which has already been linked to bank accounts, etc., action taken to prevent their abuse. This is my prayer.
Right. Let's just focus on that one point that Mr. Thomas brought up, which is interesting. And I just want to read out so far what we have from the judgment. This is all we've got. Minimum possible data obtained for Aadhaar. Purpose of enrollment requires a few documents. This is the fundamental difference with Aadhaar, and it eliminates the chance of duplicacy. This is just a secret reading out the majority judgment, or the first portion of the majority judgment. Now, Mr. Thomas says this business of duplicacy might have been misunderstood. Ritesh, we've had this conversation, and a lot of people have had this conversation. One of the things that people have said is that through RTI, Vinay, the UIDAI has confirmed, in fact, that it has not so far re-verified everybody who was registered. So, for example, if I have one Vinay Tiwari and a Ritesh Bhatia registered in my system, I have not gone back to see that if both of you have only one number each and there isn't multiple numbers assigned to you. So, the question of duplicacy cannot actually be established because the UIDAI themselves have not cross-verified everything in that system. So, do you agree on that point with Matthew Thomas?
Yeah, I actually agree with him because see, the whole idea of deduplication and all is actually not really happening. And you know, recently the hack that was pointed out, wherein I was able to,
forgive me, forgive me for interrupting you. There are more updates coming in. It says, we are of the view that there are sufficient safeguards to protect data collected under the Aadhaar scheme, says the Supreme Court. This is a pronouncement that's underway, and this is really important. He says, education had taken us from thumbprints to signature, but technology has reversed us back to thumbprints, it says. The judge says, but this is the most important bit, that the Supreme Court is of the view that there are sufficient safeguards have been taken to protect data collected under the Aadhaar scheme. Vinay?
Yeah, and I think Ramakant God did say that we should refrain from commenting as yet because the pronouncement is still underway. But the last bit that you read is perhaps most significant, because that tells you that the majority judgment believes that the government has been able to satisfy them on all the arguments that have been put forth against the scheme. And I must say this, that look, at the end of the day, in a democracy, the Supreme Court of India is the final arbiter of everything under the Constitution.
Yes. More breaking information that's coming in. The Supreme Court strikes down some provisions of the Aadhaar Act and refuses to completely strike down the Act.
Correct.
And that's breaking now. We can put that out, that some provisions, we don't know what these provisions are so far, that some provisions of the Aadhaar Act have been struck down by the Supreme Court, but it has not struck down the entire Act altogether. So this is what we have to give our viewers a recap of what we have so far. There will be 3 judgments read out by the 5-judge bench. The majority judgment so far has told us that these judges believe, that 3 out of 5 judges believe that there is no chance of duplicacy when it comes to Aadhaar, that Aadhaar satisfies the doctrine of, that Aadhaar in fact looks after and empowers the marginalized portions of society, that sufficient safeguards have been taken to make sure that the data is safe. The Supreme Court has asked the centre to bring a robust law for data protection as soon as possible. The Supreme Court has struck down Section 57 of the Aadhaar Act, and we'll just be able to pull that out for you to tell you what Section 57 of the Aadhaar Act is as my team pulls that out. I'm sorry. Of that Aadhaar Act, and we'll bring that out for you immediately. But this is the important part. It does seem, of course, that the arguments that the government made before the Supreme Court in terms of security of our data, as far as Aadhaar is concerned, in terms of the need for Aadhaar to help those marginalized and help those who require empowerment from the government, and finally the lack of duplicity. Yes, Vinay.
So Section 57 actually is the most very significant one, because that talks about how it's not just the state, but also the corporate or a person or a private entity can demand Aadhaar.
Yes. Okay. Section 57 has been struck down.
Yes. So that's been struck down.
Yes.
So that, I guess, I'm assuming should make things like Paytm or all.
Paytm, Airtel, all these.
They can't demand.
They cannot demand.
Will that include cell phones as well? Because that,
exactly,
I think,
the telecom service provider.
It would include everybody. So that's very significant from a consumer point of view.
And this is interesting, because I remember we made this demand as well. Section 57 allows, yes, you said anybody, any corporate or person, private entity to demand Aadhaar. And here was the problem, and a lot of people had complaints about the fact that anybody would ask for Aadhaar, from schools and colleges to hospitals at one point, a Shamshan Ghat was asking for Aadhaar, and there was no, the government had not bothered to put out a public list saying these people are allowed to ask for it and these are not allowed to ask for it. So I think that's what the Supreme Court has now demanded, that you need to write out a robust framework under which someone can request Aadhaar from you.
Yes, and I'm also very curious, and I'm sure maybe Ritesh can help us out more on that. I'm very curious whether this would also mean that private sector banks, which are currently asking you to link it, would that come under it? Or because a bank account is a financial document and hence you wouldn't need to?
See, we'll also have to look at 57 in detail, because it also says pursuant to another section, if they're complying with it, then it's okay.
Then it's okay.
So we also have to look at it, there's
but like certainly things like payment gateways, cell phones are out. That it pretty much means that.
Yes. Unless, again,
so
we'll have to remember that...
Will they de-link me?
Will they de-link you? And here's the big question that we're going to have to ask the government at the end of the day. All of the linking which is no longer valid now, are they going to de-link? They can't possibly give the data back. Data can never be returned. So what are they going to do now? Also, we must remember, Ritesh, that the linking of cell phones happened not because cell phone companies were wanted to build a database, because the government felt it could tackle terrorism in that manner. So again, we've not heard any sort of mention, and the majority judgment pronouncement is still underway. It's not complete. We've not heard any this thing about national security, and the government bandied about national security a lot when it was using Aadhaar. It said they wanted us to link it to bank accounts to remove black money. They wanted it to link to cell phones to remove terrorism. And they had an interesting excuse, or the interesting alibi for everything. So far we haven't heard this being mentioned so far. Use of Aadhaar for national security, or to maintain national security.
I mean, that itself, the statement itself is very absurd to me. Like, Aadhaar for national security. Honestly, because Faye, just imagine, the identity theft that's happening. It's so rampant. You just download it, you just change the photograph, and other details remains of me. And you use that. And why would a terrorist at all use a SIM card? Why would he use a mobile phone? And he'll go for his satellite phones if he has to do all those certain things. And he's not going to use an Indian SIM card to do all these operations. He's definitely going to use a SIM card from some other place. So that was really not really helpful.
But I'm going to continue to keep an eye on the judgment before we get into the minds of how terrorists think and plan terror activity. But I want to quickly go circle this back to Matthew Thomas. Mr. Thomas, the pronouncement is still underway, but from so far it does seem like the Supreme Court is of the opinion, at least majority of the bench is of the opinion, that the data is safe. So one of the things that you were worried about in terms of theft of subsidy, again they have said that this is, so far the judgment says that it empowers marginalized sections of society and gives them an identity. So it does seem that at least for these three judges, from where we're getting this majority judgment, they seem to believe in the purpose of Aadhaar and the manner in which it is being implemented.
First of all, as far as data security or national security is concerned, the companies to whom they are handing over this data under the contract have contracts with the US intelligence agencies. L1 Identity Solutions, one of the prime contractors, was founded by former CIA, FBI, Homeland Security directors. So the data is being handed over to them. So the question of data security does not arise at all. Secondly, the entire deployment of the Indian Armed Forces will be known minute to minute, because every general, every Air Force Air Marshal, every Jawan will have this number. When he uses his ATM card, or when he moves around, wherever he uses it, it will identify where he is. The armored regiments, the artillery regiment, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, minute to minute, the foreign intelligence agencies will have your data. That is absolutely clear. Secondly, unfortunately, these three judges who are pronouncing the majority judgment have lumped what UID has been telling them, that it leads to a unique identity. It does not. And it's not Matthew Thomas saying this. I have repeatedly pointed out, and I have submitted this to the Supreme Court. that 4 topmost national academies of the United States of America have said that biometric recognition or biometric identification is fallible, inherently fallible. And they have gone on to say inside the book that you cannot use it for the kind of uses which UIDAI is intending. It just cannot be used. We are trying it. It is unscientific, and even the Supreme Court cannot overcome the truths of science or mathematics. I have also submitted mathematical proof. When you talk of duplicacy, I have mathematically proved that every 10th person will match your biometrics in the field. If I go and put my biometrics onto a ration card, a ration shop scanner, it will, and if the entire database is scanned, it will keep on matching every 10th person. Now, what trick the UIDAI is playing is, they use the number and the biometrics together, and then only query the database for that particular number. You don't eliminate duplicates. Thirdly, the very system of collecting data, 50,000 enrollment centers have been shut down. They must have enrolled millions of people. That data is inside the UIDAI database. It's all junk. Hundreds of frauds and crimes have taken place. When you talk in terms of militants or something like a Pakistani spy, Khalistani militant, illegal immigrants, all these people have got it because every citizen, every resident is entitled to it. It's not just citizens. Significantly, I want to point out to your audience that the very title of the Act has been changed. Originally, the title was National Identification Authority of India Bill. Why was it changed to Aadhaar Targeted Delivery of Benefit Services, etc.? The national is gone because it is not for citizens. You cannot distinguish between a citizen and a resident. So a militant, an illegal immigrant, a spy, anybody can get the number. Once he has the number, he has a passport to success. It's the KYC for passports, for bank accounts, for ration cards, for anything. And that's the ridiculousness of the very concept.
That's true. Raghu Godavar is with us as well. And this is the main takeaway so far. Private entities cannot ask for your Aadhaar card. The government is required to write a robust list of rules as to who will be allowed to ask for Aadhaar numbers and not. Raghu, you represent an organization called Rethink Aadhaar. Was this the rethinking that you were hoping for? Or do you think perhaps you wanted more out of this?
Well, we still need to see what the overall opinion is. We are still only getting tidbits, and we'll have to read the judgment in its entirety to understand what the new situation is. But as far as I'm seeing the updates right now, it seems to be a very half step, a half measure. They have tackled some of the most obvious and, if I may say so, more media savvy aspects of the Aadhaar Act. Section 57 obviously was one of the big reasons why Aadhaar shot into prime time. And I made this point before that the concerns of urban citizens probably will be addressed by what's happening right now. But as far as the bulk and the actual purpose, as the government claims right now, of Aadhaar, targeted delivery of benefits, is concerned, what I'm reading right now is still very grey. There is absolutely nothing to conclude from there. It's at best, hot footing and not really concluding anything, if I may say so. And so we'll have to wait to read what the other judges say and what the overall opinion is. In terms of whether this is the kind of rethinking, like I said, with other countries, there has been years of, legal discussion, public discussion on what kind of identity solutions are acceptable, what kind of legal scrutiny is required. And this is literally the first time Aadhaar has been scrutinized so thoroughly. And this will not be the last time. Where eventually when we come into a regime where there's a data protection bill that's actually in conformance with data protection standards elsewhere, which actually works for India in terms of how our citizens are, data literate and how they understand data protection principles. Given all of that, we are going to be taking several baby steps before we arrive at a final solution, so to speak, in terms of what works as an identity, a digital identity, if you will, for us. So my takeaway so far from the judgment, we still need to rethink.
We still need to rethink Aadhaar. So Vinay, if you would be kind enough to explain to our audience, so it's a 5-judge bench, and this is the majority view that is currently being read out, and we're going to keep bringing more updates to our viewers as we have them. What happens to the other views, the other 2 judgments that will be read post this? Will this be the one that will hold because it's the majority, it's 3 out of 5?
Yes, it will. I mean, whatever this particular verdict says is what the new law or the new interpretation of the Aadhaar controversy is going to be. The other 2 will be infructuous to that extent. Of course, it will be very interesting to know what if they've given separate judgments, means they've differed with these 3 judges on certain points for sure, if not in entirety. We don't know that yet. But surely what has been read out right now is what will hold, because this is 3 out of 5. And so pretty much this is the majority verdict, and this is what is going to happen from tomorrow.
And so from what we've heard so far, it does seem like these were actually the main points of argument. The subsidy, and whether or not it should be made compulsory for subsidy, and is it denying people ration and food? Now, this judgment seems to think that it's fine. Yes. And it's empowering, in fact, on the contrary to that argument.
Yeah, yes, and I think there are two, three issues. I mean, I know there are, Mr. Thomas is a petitioner, so obviously he's got a ground to uphold because he's argued that in a court. But I think people are confusing between expecting a complete abolition of a service that now covers almost 96% of your population. I mean, versus creating a robustness in a system and infrastructure which makes your data or the access to the data safer and better. I think there is a bit of a confusion on that. I don't think anyone, if a scheme or anything has already covered, this data is already now with the government. 97% of Indians' data is already with the government. It doesn't really help much if the court comes down and strikes it, because then there'll be a whole lot of other issues of what, has the data been destroyed, has somebody illegally accessed it, is somebody misusing it, so on and so forth. I personally, Faye, am not willing to buy the arguments of terrorism and how spies will now have a free run in the country and terrorists will go around throwing bombs at everyone, because that's a doomsday scenario that's not going to happen. 26/11 had happened much before Aadhaar came into this country. Terrorists are not necessarily linking Aadhaars to various things to carry out acts. They can come in whichever way they want illegally and do what they feel like. It's carried out by intelligence operatives across the world. That's nothing to do with identity documents. And I think that's a bit of a misnomer and a misinterpretation of what the scheme is all about. Having said that, I think we had always mentioned, and Faye, you had mentioned very clearly, that this act has several aspects within this, what you call, arguments that have happened. So it's not going to be an all or none judgment. It has to be certain parts of the judgment will be struck down, some of them will be upheld. And so far, from what we've heard, is the Justice Decree has upheld the concept of Aadhaar and termed it as robust and termed it as an instrument which does help, but has one by one started talking about what aspects of that particular implementation needs to be struck down. Now, we so far know about Section 57 being struck down, which I may just add to my friend, because he mentioned that it's an urban issue. It is not. Cell phone access in India is now as rural as it can get, and it impacts every single individual. I mean, we have almost 90% plus cell phone penetration, so it's not just an urban issue. It's an issue for individuals as well.
This thing has come up of the children. That's quite a big relief. That enrollment of children only with parental consent, and they should be given an option to exit on attaining majority.
Yes, so this is what we're given to understand as well. 33(2), Section 33(2), and I believe this will have to do with education institutions, although our reporter hasn't given us that confirmation yet, but this has to do with CBSE, NEET and schools. Now, as far as minor children are concerned, I believe the Supreme Court has said only with parents' consent can the Aadhaar be requested, and this is one of the points as well that was under debate on whether or not minor children could be the rights of children or the inclusion of minor children in the Aadhaar, and it says with parental consent. Vinay, that's what we have. Section 332, could we have that looked at, please? And could we have an update on that? It basically, no person can be denied government benefits only due to the absence of Aadhaar. These are other updates that we're receiving right now, and these are other updates that we're receiving at this point. So just to focus on the children and the fact that minors, the government or nobody, no school can request an Aadhaar without the parents' consent.
Yes, and I'm hoping that this aspect of the law gets publicized a lot, because remember, in large parts of India, outside of urban centers, the knowledge that you can actually give consent or deny it is not really well known. I mean, a lot of people perhaps wouldn't know that now post this judgment you can actually say no to it if it's a minor, because so far they were being compelled to do it. And I think because of the admission processes now demanding Aadhaar, and whether a lot of other processes demanding Aadhaar, parents were just simply doing it. And if I'm not wrong, there are 3 age groups at which you're allowed to update your Aadhaar. I think it's at the birth, and then the birth, 3 years, and then 15 years at stage when you can update that. So clearly, this one has very significant, I mean, I personally believe it's very significant because it does talk about a nuanced issue. I'm not sure what they said about CBSC. If that...
Well, to add over here, this is a good point that they have said that in case even if the parent has enrolled, the child on attaining adulthood can go and request for deletion, which is...
Yes, absolutely.
Which is pretty good. So that means now you can actually approach UID and say, okay, I don't want my data to be there.
Absolutely.
I mean, the child.
The child, exactly.
Well, school admissions...
in March 2017, there was a judgment.
Sorry. School admissions, are not a benefit under Section 7. Aadhaar cannot be mandated for the same, says the Supreme Court.
So the new update is very big.
Yes. Aadhaar not mandatory for bank accounts and for SIM cards.
Awesome.
For PAN, Aadhaar is not mandatory. So this is really important. Can we just put that up on the screen that you are not? Thank God for this clarity. My God, we
Mirror
should
now for taking this up. Mirror now has like really taken this so strongly.
Finally, some clarity on this point, and we've been asking about this for so long, and I'm so glad about this right now. This is almost 2 years, yes. Yeah. And most of the guests who are on the panel right now have been part of this, this question for us. For the last 2 years, Aadhaar is not mandatory for bank accounts. It's not mandatory for SIM cards. It's not mandatory to get your PAN, and no mobile company can demand. Oh, it is mandatory.
Only for PAN is it mandatory. It's not mandatory for accounts and for SIM cards.
And for SIM cards, I beg your pardon. And sorry, and no mobile company can demand an Aadhaar. So that answers your question. Yeah. Yes. So, of course, the next question that we will ask now is, so what happens to the ones that already have all the data when they give it back? We're not really sure how that's going to work. But so far, retribution for those guys who have been listening to Mirror now for the last 1 year and have not linked any of your stuff to your Aadhaar, you no longer have to. And that's why we were waiting for, that's why we're waiting for this.
Is mandatory for PAN?
It is mandatory for PAN, Mr. Thomas. It is mandatory for PAN. This is what we have right now. Let me just go over what we have for our viewers. This is information that's coming in that the Supreme Court has decided that Aadhaar is not mandatory for bank accounts. It is not mandatory for SIM. It is mandatory for PAN. No mobile company can demand or ask you for your Aadhaar. We also know that the government has said, and Mr. Thomas, to respond to what you had said earlier, the Supreme Court had said the government needs to ensure illegal migrants will not gain access to Aadhaar cards. And they've put the Supreme Court has put the onus on the government at this point to ensure that this doesn't happen.
There's one more very user-friendly update.
Yes.
Faye.
Let me just read that out for you.
Which is essentially saying that Aadhaar is not mandatory for school admissions of children.
Yes.
It will only be mandatory for UGC and NEET NEET exams. That's it. But for school admissions, you cannot demand Aadhaar compulsorily.
Yes. In fact, let me just read out some of that to you. And this is to do with Section 7. Aadhaar benefits and services under Section 7 should be of the nature of welfare schemes targeted at a particular deprived community. Now, CBSE and NEET are not welfare schemes and hence cannot mandate Aadhaar. Aadhaar school admissions are not a benefit under Section 7, so it cannot be mandated for school admissions either. Benefits are mandatory. Linking can only be when there are benefits being rolled out for a deprived class of society. Supreme Court directed the government that no Aadhaar should be given to illegal migrants. No child should be denied entry into any scheme based on not being able to submit their Aadhaar number. The Supreme Court has, as of today, said we do not find anything in the Aadhaar Act that violates the right of privacy of individual citizens. The Supreme Court also upholds the passing of Aadhaar bill as a money bill in Lok Sabha. This is important. And bank accounts can't be mandatorily asked to link with Aadhaar. Also, Income Tax Act being upheld, that modification of the Income Tax Act, the very, the one that we debated a lot. It's been upheld. The 39AA, which basically asked for the quoting of Aadhaar and enrollment number with your PAN account when you file your income tax returns.
What did they say about the money bill?
Basically, that it has upheld the Aadhaar Act being passed as a money bill.
Right.
It was one of the petitions that was placed
before. Yes, Chidambaram made that argument a lot.
Yes.
So basically, we are back to from where Aadhaar started, actually.
Well, not entirely.
Except for not entirely. Except for the PAN thing.
But I think basically what the court has done is that it's held up the purity of the fundamental idea of what Aadhaar was meant to be. There's more though. If I may just finish reading this, it says. One in Income Tax Act, and this was basically asking you to enroll and to link with the PAN. PAN linkage and the entire issue could be re-examined, and we now apparently have Justice Chandrachud who has begun his reading of his reading of the judgment. So this is where we are. So for our viewers, let me just take you through this one more time. No need to link to your bank account, no need to link to your SIM card. You still have to link to PAN card and income tax, and you still have to be able to, you don't have to give it to schools, you don't have to give it to UGC and NEET, you don't have to give it to anything else. So, I'm sorry, what?
I mean, it showed up that it's mandatory for NEET and UGC.
Okay.
So we need to have some clarification over there also.
No, it's not mandatory. It is not mandatory for school admissions, for NEET or for UGC. In fact, the court here, Vinay, has very clearly said that it should be with the singular purpose of providing subsidies for those in weaker sections of society who need subsidies. So there's absolute crystal clarity there.
Yes, and I think that's the point we were making earlier when Mr. Thomas was making his point that look, I don't think anyone should have reasonably expected the court to strike down in entirety a scheme which now covers 97% of India. That's never really going to happen. Having said that, I think so far what we've seen, the courts have, as Ritesh was rightly saying, brought it back to its original intent. This was supposed to be a delivery vehicle for benefits, for targeted benefit of deliveries, and the court has actually pushed the government back to doing that. It has told you that all the other things that you've added subsequently along the journey are completely not legal, constitutionally not allowed for, and hence you can't compel citizens from doing it. And all the points that they've mentioned have actually taken care of the bulk and the substantive arguments that have been made so far on why this was being made and pushed into every personal sphere of our life, including by private entities. And I think that's where the larger concern was.
Ritesh?
Now, having said that, Faye, that it is meant back for the rural things, and I have always been fighting for that point, that okay, you're going to the rural areas, you want to give them those subsidies, but what about the last mile connectivity? Now, this is where they should really focus upon. The government needs to focus upon the last mile connectivity. People are walking down from 4 kilometers just to get their subsidies, and they go back because, the ration wala has to say that the server is down or there's no connectivity. Now, this is where the real digitalization is. They need to focus on rural digitalization.
Absolutely. So, as far as the rest of it is concerned, rural digitalization is what you said, but we just want to go for this one more time, just to be clear on what we have so far. Aadhaar not needed for bank accounts, not needed for SIM cards, needed for PAN cards. So, that linking that you were asked to do under the income tax, the modification of the income tax law, you will have to continue to do. It has been upheld as a money bill. The passage of the Aadhaar Act as a money bill, which was being challenged in court, that has been upheld as well. Ramakant Gaur, the things that we went over so far, and we had, it was such a sort of a star-studded appeal before the Supreme Court, just to go over the kind of lawyers who argued this case, right? Shyam Diwan, Kapil Sibal, Gopal Subramaniam, Arvind Dattar, Chidambaram, Mr. Vishwanath, Anand Grover and Meenakshi Arora. These are the people, some of the people who argued before the Supreme Court. So, Ramakant Gaur, in a lot of the arguments that, that were placed before the court, it does seem like the court has upheld the basic idea that this should be used to authenticate those people who require subsidy from government. This is what Aadhaar was meant for to begin with. So,
you created Aadhaar for this purpose only. So, so you need to stick to your purpose. You need not to extend the purpose to national security, to the banks, to other private players and other services as well. I think there is one more line which is added, and it is being shown that section 33(2) is also struck down, which is very important because it is relating to national security, and this aspect was given completely to the officer of level of joint secretary.
Hello.
Anyone can tap into your information. That section 32 deals with the powers given to the joint secretary level officer, and who can give these details to the security agencies. And if it is done, this is really of great importance. It's a great achievement of the right to privacy argument.
Right. Mr. Matthew Thomas, your reactions to what we have so far, and this is the majority judgment. So while Justice Chandrachud continues to read his, his opinion as well, and we'll bring updates, bring our viewers updates of what is being read out. But this is the majority judgment, Mr. Thomas. Your reaction so far on what we have?
Yeah, it's a partial victory. A beachhead has been established. I think we should press on. We should go for a review and probably enable the learned justices to understand that the biometrics does not lead to elimination of duplicacy. Very interestingly, they mentioned that the parents' consent should be taken for enrollment of the child. Now, children do not have biometrics at all. And I will refer to Section 5 of the Act, which is an admission that biometrics does not work for the large percentage of the population. Section 5 says special provisions for issuance of Aadhaar number to certain category of persons. The authority shall take special measures to issue Aadhaar number to women, children, senior citizens, persons with disability, unskilled and unorganized workers, nomadic tribes, and to such other persons who do not have permanent dwelling. Now, if you take this number who needs special provisions for the issuance of Aadhaar number, it will come to around 90% of the population. Now, if 90% of the population needs special measures, what are they? And why are they required? And if they are required and the law provides for it, why have they not been provided when 1.2 billion people were enrolled? So this Section 5 itself leaves the cat out of the bag. It shows that biometric identification just does not work. You cannot use it for generating these numbers. Secondly, the Supreme Court has said that no illegal immigrant must be issued the number. When you make all residents eligible for it, illegal immigrants are as much a resident as anybody else. Spies are residents. Militants are residents. Every Maoist can get it. Now, let me show you an UIDA reply to a police officer who was investigating the issue of Aadhaar number to two illegal Bangladeshi immigrants. The reply states, and let me read it, it says, Aadhaars issued to two persons referred by the Inspector of Police were found to be genuine enrollments. In other words, UIDA is saying that issue of the Aadhaar number or their enrollment is genuine. And the reason is the system of enrollment itself is faulty. You just accept any document, there's no verification at all, and that results in all kinds of unsavory elements getting into it. And I repeatedly said, which the Supreme Court has not understood, the control is not with UIDI. The control is with the foreign firms who provide these biometric services. In fact, in the contract itself, the UIDA says it's a black box. It's a black box. That means a black box is something where you put in some input, you do not know what happens inside it, and some output comes and you lump it, you take it in. So that's exactly what's happening. These foreign firms are provided UIDA with a black box. They are told to put the input data there. Input data itself is wrong because it could be an illegal immigrant, it could be a Pakistani spy. Only last week a Chinese person was caught with this Aadhaar number. That Chinese person had rented a house in one of the northeastern states with 80,000 rupees rental, and he had no income. He obviously must be a Chinese spy. So he can have a PAN number because he has got the Aadhaar number, and he can open bank accounts, he can do whatever he wants. The very concept is wrong. So striking down a few sections is like treating cancer with an aspirin. It just doesn't work. You need to destroy this entire data and come out with some other system.
Okay, let's, for those of our viewers who've just joined us, the Supreme Court has given us a judgment on Aadhaar. We are still awaiting the reading out of the the minority judgments, but the majority judgment of the 5-judge bench. This is where it stands. You do need to link your Aadhaar to your PAN card. You will have to submit an Aadhaar every time you get a new PAN card, and you will have to submit your Aadhaar effectively to file your tax returns. Now, you will not need an Aadhaar to open a new bank account. You will not need to link your bank account. You will not need an Aadhaar to get a new SIM card. You will not need to link your existing SIM card. You will not need Aadhaar for your children's school admissions or for anything else. And we understand that over the last year, every document that the school has asked for children to fill out has asked for the Aadhaar number. They're not allowed to do so. Schools are not allowed to ask for Aadhaar to be compulsory. If the parents want to, and I'm not sure why they would want to at all anymore, if the parents want to, they can volunteer and submit that Aadhaar. Also, I think the actual making of an Aadhaar for a child should, at this point, would be in question. Why would you make one if it's not compulsory, right?
And what purpose it is serving actually?
Yes.
To the child. If you see what purpose, is it really, now if you see in totality, we are back to what originally, the Aadhaar started
there's just
with.
one, sorry, because I spent so much time in personal finance, if you were to open a bank account for your child and that bank account required a PAN card and the PAN card required an Aadhaar, then you would need to make an Aadhaar, right? Because you have to have a PAN card.
But
for the minor,
to the PAN card of
in any case, the minor's account is with the parent.
With the parent. Okay, so that's fair enough. And from what we understand, we're waiting for clarity on the question of CBSE and NEET because we still don't know. There are some, conflicting. There's some conflicting ideas on whether or not it is compulsory for CBSE and NEET. But just to go over what we have, viewers, the courts have decided that Aadhaar should be used specifically to hand out subsidy to people who who need access to subsidy. So people who are using ration cards, for example, people who are taking subsidy of gas cylinders. So if you're using a subsidized gas cylinder, you will need to be able to submit your Aadhaar. Farmers, for example, who take subsidy on on inputs that they're using, things like that. I don't know if Thomas Franco can hear us. Mr. Franco, can you hear us? Thomas Franco is the General Secretary of the All India Bank Officers Confederation. One of the petitioners before the Supreme Court. Mr. Franco, what is your reaction to the judgment that you've heard so far? And this is a big win for you. Bank accounts no longer need to be linked, which means that does it free up the bank officers from the job of actually enrolling people for Aadhaar? This was one of the problems that you had. You were being asked to do enrollments as well in the PSUs.
Well, I am happy that that provision has been struck off, that Aadhaar should not be made mandatory for the bank accounts. But now those who have been coerced to open this account with Aadhaar and linkage has been done, the bank should be asked to de-link. Whoever wants to de-link, they should be allowed to de-link. But there are other issues that even now there is coercion, that if it is not made mandatory also, there is likelihood that they will still say that make it voluntarily but make it compulsorily orally. That whole coercion can continue to happen. That has to be avoided.
Right. Vinay?
Yeah, in fact, one of the updates just come in is Justice Chandrachud in his minority judgments has said the entire Aadhaar Act is unconstitutional. So
no wonder he was in the minority.
That's right. He's taken the view which Mr. Thomas would have originally wanted, I guess, that he's saying the very act is unconstitutional and you cannot have that. But obviously he's in a minority because the majority verdict is out.
So had it been up to Justice Chandrachud, he would have tossed the whole thing out.
Yeah, and the grounds he's taken is that because it was passed as a money bill, it's illegitimate. He's taken that legal ground. So he's saying you're actually violating your own constitution because money bills are only allowed under 6 circumstances and you violated that and hence it is unconstitutional.
Yes, and there was no reason, and it's important to note that the majority of the 3 judges found it to be valid, that it was passed as a money bill. Yeah,
and I think we should again re-stress that while we are talking about Justice Chandrachud's judgment, this will not hold because this is the minority verdict. The 3 out of the 5 judges have already given a majority verdict.
It comes from a Supreme Court judge.
Yes, so it has a valid point.
It has a very, very valid point.
In an argumentative state, yes. If somebody goes to a review,
yes, exactly. Absolutely. You know, the fact it is coming from Justice Chandrachud has got a real strong point.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we're just waiting for more updates to come in as far as this is concerned, and we will get more updates on what Justice Chandrachud is saying. But if we just examine this one point of the fact that the money bill effectively, has been found valid as well, and again, it was Mr. Chidambaram who argued quite passionately before the Supreme Court that this should not have been allowed. The opposition took grave, offence to the government having brought this in, or brought portions of it as well. The amendments as the money bill, but the court has upheld it.
The court has upheld it, and I think this actually, in many ways, going forward, can open up a new interpretation of the aspect of money bills, as well. I mean, so there is a precedence now that the court has said where they've agreed that a slight deviation from the original statute of money bill can be changed, and I think the current government has used it because obviously there was an issue of majority not being there in both houses. So they went the money bill route, and technically now this can become a precedence for maybe a similar financial bill or any other bill which is not under those 6 provisions that you have for money bill. It can possibly be used again. So it's very significant. I think for all financial journalists and all journalists who track parliamentary lawmaking, this is very significant because it can now become precedence going forward as well.
The Aadhaar scheme does not provide a robust mechanism to get consent of citizens before collecting their demographic and biometric data, says Justice Chandrachud. So true. Yeah, so I have a feeling that a lot of the members of our panel are going to agree with this judgment. Oh, yes. Unfortunately, this is the minority judgment. Yeah. We do have more of that's coming in, but I want to focus on some of the points that we have so far. Bank accounts to begin with. Again, Thomas Franco is with us and he's a bank officer. Mr. Franco, now that the Supreme Court has said that Aadhaar linking is not compulsory for bank accounts. So those of us who have not linked are home free at this point. We don't have to worry. But all of those people who have linked, that's already done. There's no delinking that's possible. No data is going to be given back to these customers, is it? Mr. Franco, can you hear me?
Not audible.
You know, Faye?
Yeah. Now I can hear you.
Yes, Mr. Franco, obviously for those people who've already done the linking, there's nothing that can be done there. You can't de-link or you can't unlink the Aadhaar from someone's bank account at this point.
So my suggestion would be that there should be a provision for de-linking.
Okay.
Because it was due to coercion, quite a lot of people have linked the accounts. Otherwise, they were not able to get the pension. Even my account, when I wanted to open a new account, they compelled that there should be a Aadhaar linkage. Without that, new account cannot be opened. So these people who want to de-link, they should be allowed to de-link. That provision should be made. Otherwise, already almost 99% of the accounts have been linked due to coercion. Now the judgment has come very late. The UIDA should create a provision that the people who want to de-link, they can de-link. and they should also issue instruction to the banks to say that they should not force the people orally. Now coercion takes place not only by writing. They will tell orally that give an undertaking that I am making this declaration voluntary. That is not correct. So my appeal would be that there should be a provision for delinking. Number two, people in the bank, they should not be asked to continue to do this linkage. Already there has been a coercion from the ADI that 10% of the branches should be used for linking and opening Aadhaar accounts. Okay. That we are finding it extremely difficult with shortage of officers and staff, and people are not able to concentrate on other regular work like NPA recovery. Okay. So immediately that provision should be stopped also.
Absolutely. And if my panel will allow me some romanticism here of the judgment, and I always do, democracy lives and breathes. And so this entire business of us as citizens being given a choice of the fact that if you don't want a subsidy from the government, and this was the entire appeal, and the Supreme Court heard us, if you don't want a subsidy from the government, so if you're not taking a subsidized gas cylinder, if you're not taking any sort of subsidized ration from the government, and if you're paying full price for everything and you want your privacy, you want to be able to hold on to it and say, I'm not giving you any of this detail, the court has allowed you that option. Vinay?
Yes. But I mean, since you were romanticizing, one other good news for viewers, you won't get those spam SMSs from tomorrow, hopefully, where every week they're asking you to link everything to their account.
Yes.
And
I call that as Aadhaar Giri.
Aadhaar Giri.
Aadhaar Giri.
Aadhaar Giri.
Aadhaar Giri. No, but I actually had a question for Mr. Franco. I don't know if you can clarify. Does this order actually also cover, say, things like Jan Dhan accounts? Because Jan Dhan accounts were actually meant for transfer of certain government schemes. So will that also be now Aadhaar free, or Jan Dhan accounts can be opened without Aadhaar?
In fact, let's do one thing before Mr. Franco answers this question. Mr. Franco, let's open up the phone lines. I know that viewers, including those who have accessed us on Facebook right now, will have a lot of questions, and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can with the ability of the experts on the panel. So pick up the phone and call us if you have questions as to what works, what doesn't, what can you do, what you can't do. Thomas Franco, what does this mean for Jan Dhan accounts? But I'm assuming, like you said, since they were explicitly designed for subsidy, that they will require an Aadhaar card, because it's part of the JAM, and it is then Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile. So then the JAM doesn't work if you take A away from the middle.
Meanwhile, Justice Chanchud is almost taking a cue from everything Mr. Thomas has said. So he's almost reading out what he just said on air.
Mr. Thomas, that question about Jan Dhan accounts, please.
Jan Dhan accounts also, there has been compulsion that it should be Aadhaar linked, and Jan Dhan, the numbers itself is kind of a fraud. When 19 crore accounts were opened, the Prime Minister of the country said that already 99.5% of the population has been covered, but now we have 32 crore Jan Dhan accounts. But all these accounts, as on date, it has been made mandatory to have Aadhaar linkage. So I am once again appealing that there should be a provision for delinking. Unless that is created, this judgment will not be of any use to the people.
Faye, I agree with him, because in any case, in the new bill that's coming, the data privacy bill, and I'm sure the judges are going to talk about it, that try to bring it at the earliest, the data protection and our data privacy bill. So that itself says that there is a principle of right to erasure. So here we should be having that right to erasure, that I don't want this with this bank. And more importantly, all the, a little from the digital wallets point of view, we have all this Paytm and other UPI based apps where it's compulsory. If the KYC, it's all based on Aadhaar. That's right. So at least all those things. Now, I'm sure the digital wallet providers also would be pretty happy about it.
That's right.
In fact, we do have some people on the phone line right now, and we're not able to connect with our reporter at Supreme Court. But who do we have on the phone line? All right. Let me just point out the latest update that Justice Chandrachud has made a statement saying there is a risk of surveillance of people on the basis of Aadhaar data collected under Aadhaar scheme, and the data could be misused. So we do have a sitting Supreme Court judge who is acknowledging this at this point. So, Mr. Matthew, who's still with us, Matthew Thomas, who's still with us. So here we have Justice Chandrachud acknowledging the possibility of surveillance. Mr. Matthew Thomas.
Yeah. Yes. I can't hear her. Just tell her I can't hear her.
All right, Miss. Okay, Ramakant, go. The possibility of surveillance being acknowledged here by Justice Chandrachud.
Which is true. See, your data is available to all foreign companies. All the servers, all the technology is provided by the foreign companies. And one of the panelists has rightly pointed it out that the company which is the L1 in maintaining this data has the officials of ex-CIA, ex-FBI and ex-government, ex-spies. So basically, if your data is in their hands, how would they use, misuse or abuse that data? It is completely left at their discretion. So Justice Chandrachud is right in saying that. And Faye, this may not be the last fight. This judgment may be referred to the larger bench in the coming times. So you see, right to privacy judgment, there were certain conflicting opinions in the earlier judgments, and the issue was referred to the larger bench. It has been happening in the Indian judicial history. You may see that Justice Chandrachud's verdict may prevail at any point of time. That may be my perception today, but it may come true at any point of time.
Vinay, do you see that as a possibility?
Well, look, theoretically on paper, there are still the possibilities of a curative petition or a review petition being filed, because that's what happened even in the 377 judgment, for instance, where the court reopened its own judgment and gave a one which was different from the past. I mean, that can happen because this is a 5-judge bench. You can still have a 7 or a 9-judge bench. We've had at least one major the Shaddanand case had a 13-judge bench in India. So you can possibly have that. I'm not sure how quickly that can happen, and the reason I'm saying quickly is that do remember that even this judgment has come at a time when, quote unquote, if I was to borrow from Justice Chandrachud's judgment, the damage has already been done. You already have data of 90% plus people in your data bank, and however much a court or a judge might now be fear that there is a surveillance state possibility, the safety and security of the data has already been compromised. So in that sense, this judgment has come not a day sooner. It should have happened way earlier. It's come a little late. I mean, it's now happened. But so now the larger focus will have to be on maintaining data integrity, and that's where the data protection bill and so on and so forth, that becomes an issue of far more greater importance than whether Aadhaar should be struck down or not. Because my problem is that even if, say, hypothetically a year from now, a larger bench strikes the whole concept down, we've already parted with our data.
Yes.
And actually a data which has been parted without a legal framework with some rogue element is way more dangerous than if it is part of a government machinery. There's no accountability then at all.
But you know, Faye, I would want to add a very important point over here. If Aadhaar is now still valid, the threat of identity theft still prevails. Because we are still using it as an identity and not as an authentication. So I just wish they talk something about it, you know, and it should not be made mandatory to be used as an identity.
In fact, Anupam Saraf joins us right now. Anupam Saraf has been a petitioner in this case. Mr. Saraf, thank you so much for joining us. Your reactions to what you've heard in the Supreme Court so far, and just to give our audience an idea that Justice Chandrachud is still reading out his judgment. His remarks basically, at one point he says, Vinay, he says it violates sections 14 and 21 of the Constitution.
Yes.
He's being very harsh on Aadhaar. He's saying if you go on like this, it will be impossible to live in India without Aadhaar. Allowing private enterprise to use Aadhaar numbers will lead to exploitation of data. It does not pass the basic test of Article 14. absence of an independent regulatory framework renders it, it violates citizens' rights. So he's taken a very, very strong stand here. But unfortunately, it's a minority stand.
Absolutely.
Mr. Saraf, what is your reaction to what we've heard so far?
Well, I think Justice Chandrachud is completely right in stating that the Aadhaar is a fraud on the Constitution and it cannot be upheld as a money bill. So it's extremely important to recognize that watering down the Aadhaar Act does not really satisfy the requirements to ensure that the country is protected from national security issues that have been unleashed by Aadhaar. It does not protect the citizens because it is possible to continue to coerce every citizen with Aadhaar under Section 139A of the Income Tax Act. It also will allow the government and private parties to coerce citizens by misinterpreting Section 7 of the Aadhaar Act. And it's important to recognize that, as Justice Chandrachud has very correctly stated, there is no foundation for upholding the Aadhaar Act. And as I have repeatedly said, it is not even an identification document, and UIDAI is not identifying any person. And so replacing the idea of identifying people with authentication is completely wrong. And to simply explain it to your viewers, if you were to use a key to open a lock, the key helps, the lock just says that this is a valid key. It does not identify who holds the key. So authentication is like the lock saying that this is a valid key. It does not say who holds the key. So when you use your biometric for accessing any services with Aadhaar, all that the UIDAI can say that this is a valid biometric associated with the Aadhaar number. It does not identify the person who has submitted the biometric. This biometric could have been stored on computers, on hard disks, on mobile phones, or submitted through various other mechanisms that hackers very well know. It could have been altered at the site of the UIDAI, as has been indicated by the Huffington Post story a few weeks ago, which clearly indicated that with just 2,500 rupees, it's possible for access to the CIDR, where the demographic and biometric data of any person can be rewritten. It's also a matter of grave concern that it has not been noticed by the majority stand so far that the Aadhaar is the only document which is not certified by anybody. It has never been audited. It has never been verified. So if you look at the PAN card, if you look at the driver's license, if you look at the passport, if you look at the election card, these are all certified, and there is a law and there is a law enforcement authority, a government officer who stands by issuing of these documents. Aadhaar is the only one where neither the UIDAI nor any government department stands by the identity of a person, the address of a person, or even the biometric of a person.
Yes.
So if the biometric is replaced subsequently or gets exchanged,
yes, in fact,
who is responsible?
Mr.
Who is responsible for transactions done with any Aadhaar card?
Forgive me for interrupting you, but I just want to read out more of the updates that are coming in from Justice Chandrachud. He says, mobile phones are a storehouse of information of lifestyle and preferences. Service providers shall delete any information collected by them after linking Aadhaar with SIM, and this is important.
This is important.
What is the will we have to follow this now?
Well, unfortunately, however much we may love what Justice Chandrachud is saying in his judgment,
yes, we really
he remains in a minority. Unfortunately,
no, but,
this will not be binding.
This will not be binding at all.
This will not be binding because I'm assuming that the other three the judges who written judgment don't say this. If they have said so as well, we haven't read the whole judgment, so I'm assuming.
Well, they have said it's no longer mandatory to link Aadhaar and SIM, but we haven't received any update on whether or not
my
existing data should
understanding
be
is that if it's a bench which is giving an order,
yes,
the decisions or the pronouncements given by the majority of the judges holds true in terms of what becomes law or what is to be complied with. Any part of the minority judgment does not have to be complied with, because otherwise the whole concept of a majority verdict gets defeated. I think, I don't know if Ramakant Gaur is still on.
No, he isn't, unfortunately. He had to leave.
But that's my understanding, because you really, so this is a minority judgment. I mean, this differs from the majority verdict, and everything, all provisions of the majority verdict are the ones which will be enforceable and not the one which has been said by the minority judge.
Oh, that's unfortunate, because this is such, because you are right. We really love what Justice Chandrachud is saying today. You know, we love what Justice Chandrachud says every day, but today particularly, we're all big fans. Here he says that, you know, he's actually asked that service providers delete all information that has been collected by them after linking of Aadhaar. And, you know, this is a Supreme Court judge at the end of the day. And we have Vineet Goenka joining us right now. Vineet Goenka, it seems like we both won today. You got your retribution of the fact that the Supreme Court has said that it is satisfied with the infrastructure and the security that has been put in place in terms of data. I've got retribution of the fact that the Supreme Court has said that if I don't want any sort of subsidy from the government, I needn't link my Aadhaar with any bank account or SIM card or anything else. So, on a rare occasion, Vineet Goenka, both you and I have won today.
This is the beauty of democracy, probably, where even the judges in Supreme Court can have difference of opinion when they are predicting a judgment. And I think that is the beauty of this particular country, where, you know, judges can freely comment on what the executives have decided. And this is victory of 125 crore people, minus the minority which has a sadistic pleasure in commenting anything which is coming from the central government. So I think only chase beating will be done by some minority, which is the microscopic minority which will be there. But anyway, if you see, we all have to wait for the entire judgment to come up, because right now what we are doing, each of us is doing, is line by line reaction on the judgments coming as they are coming up. So we'll have to wait till the entire judgment comes out and then understand the judgment in toto. I would like to also say that this is more or less, you know, the belief which has been there in the central government, the policies of the central government which has been reiterated by the Supreme Court. The entire scheme of EIDA is more or less for the larger benefit of community. It is for the transparency. It is nothing to do with surveillance that has been established here. And today in 2018, it will be hard to say that you make a law and forget it. Today, as the technology advances, as the mankind progresses, we will have to debate every law, every policy which is there on a dynamic basis. Probably that's what has been coming out of this particular judgment. And I am happy that more or less whatever has been done in the last 4 years has been upheld. We have case where the judgment has been discussed on privacy, it has been discussed on linking, it has also discussed on the security of this. Now all these people who were opposing on various counts, the architecture as a problem, they have been shut down. The people who are talking about privacy issue, they have been shut down right now. The linking of PAN card. Now I heard one of the panelists saying that the banks are not been linked. Let me just remind you, Faye, the PAN card linking is there with Aadhaar, and bank account opening with PAN is there. And then you file an ITR which has details of your bank. So more or less the details are there with the authorities when it is required. And a genuine person, an honest person need not worry. That was my line from the day one I used to come on your panel. Maybe more than 30 times I have come on your panel. Every time I used to say, those who are genuine, those who do not have anything to hide, need not worry about this particular linkage. Only those who have something to hide have to worry about this. I only have one thing which I would like to share with Anupam ji. He is a very learned man. He is a very capable man. But one thing, you know, when you believe in some other person, Huffington Post, and you comment on the judges, it shows the white supremacy which you have. The slavery which is there in the mind is still not gone.
No, hang on. No, Mr. Vineet Goenka, let me stop you there. I believe you misunderstood what white supremacy is, and I won't allow that. No, I'm going to stop you there. The idea of white supremacy means something else altogether. You misunderstood it, and you're not using it in the right sense.
Is Huffington Post bigger than judgment given by the 5 judges here?
So if you're going to quote the judgments by the 5 judges, then let's also look at what the judges have said. We have a judge here who's saying that you must delete all the information that a mobile phone providers have.
Of course. So I would like to.
We have a judge who is saying that this will cause
majority. I would have said that would have been a problem. I have no problem with what judges say, but I have a problem when you believe somebody who is from outside.
Okay.
You say Snowden said so.
Huffington
Post said so.
Okay. No, one second.
Bill Gates what he said. Nobody talks about a gentleman called
Mr. Goenka, there's no reason to get upset. The judgments are being pronounced. We're done. The arguments are over. Why are you getting upset? Now here is Justice Chandrachud of the Supreme
I'm not
Court.
upset, rather I'm celebrating today.
It doesn't sound like it though. It sounds, here's Justice Chandrachud saying, there is a risk of surveillance. He's used the word surveillance of people on the basis of data collected under Aadhaar scheme, and the data could be misused. Now respond to the judge of the Supreme Court.
Can you just tell me what Justice Sekrit said about this? What did Justice Sekrit talk about this? What did Justice Deepak Mishra said about this particular part? Please educate us on that also, because this is individual view of the Chandrachud ji. But what about the other 3 judges who were there?
No, you said you will only respond to judges today, that we should not quote anybody else. I'm then quoting a judge. Now you're being selective in that matter as well.
Of course. So I said I get worried when a judge says so. I also get worried when the judge says so. I don't get worried when some Dom, Dick, Harry from outside said. So when Justice Chandrachud made this comment, that pained me. That's it. Something is there which has to be looked upon, but not that somebody from outside comes and teaches us.
So let me just change the question here. Let me just change the question here.
It's a conscience.
No, here's the question then. Like Justice Chandrachud has, in a very valid point he has made, that while the majority judgment has said that it is no longer required for us to link our Aadhaar to SIM cards, he has said that all of the data that has been collected so far must be destroyed. Will the government make a regulation asking phone companies to destroy the data that they have collected?
Can I ask you what was the majority judgment also said? Let us also see what Justice Shekri told about this particular thing. And as I said, let us wait for entire judgment to come out and let's see. And more or less, data is not stored at the private party. Aadhaar has 2 parts of data. One is biometrics, which is separately stored. Another part is which there is demographical data, which is used for authentication. No mobile company was holding your data. They were just validating it through the systems which are external. So there is no question of, and one more judgment has been there where we have to talk about Justice Sikri also. We also have to talk about Justice Deepak Mishra, who has also talked about this particular part. So let us wait for the entire judgment to come. More or less, this is clear. The Aadhaar has been validated. There is a sanctity to it. All those who were trying to make noise about this now have been shut, I think, more or less. So we'll have to wait for one more hour till everybody speaks about this, and we'll have a clear picture what is there in the shade.
Forgive me, Vinit Goenka, did you say that the government will bring in a regulation ensuring that all of this data is now deleted?
I didn't say so. I said we will have to watch what the entire judgment comes out. Government and the party both will come out with its official statement once the entire judgment is come. Right now what we are doing in this panel is reacting on every line which is coming out. And this is not an official stand. The official stand will come once the copy of the judgment comes out to the government, and then the people who will sit down and understand what is there. And if there is a concern, naturally the government will also discuss it with people who are required to be discussed. So right now what I see this is there is no concern. But maybe as the case progresses, there may be reasons for deliberations also. But right now, this is a welcome judgment till now what has come out. So far, it's very good.
Vinay?
No, just 2 things. One is that I think there was some confusion earlier about what the majority judgment said about UGC and NET exam. That clarification has now come. And they have said that Aadhaar is not mandatory even for UGC or NET exams, number 1. Number 2, on the just limited point of Vineet, I know he got a little upset about Mr. Saraf mentioning Huffington Post. Well, I agree with him that we really don't have to look at somebody else to validate what a Supreme Court judge has said or not said. No, but having said that, this whole concept of inside-outside is absurd, and I'll tell you why. Every single Supreme Court Constitution judge bench judgments quote international rulings as well. So this inside-outside argument does not hold. I mean, that's a very absurd argument. There are international precedences in courts as well which can be looked upon, and they're routinely looked upon by Supreme Court. The 377 judgment relied on 23 international judgments from 17 different countries. Now, we can't say, oh, those are white fellows and why should we look at them and we have brains of our own. Of course, we have brains of our own, and the majority verdict has given a very nuanced and a very, very fine judgment. And he's right that ultimately what the majority ruling is what holds.
Let's also be really clear about the fact that we buy technology from overseas. We adopt technology from overseas. We can't turn around and say that, okay, it's good for us in some ways, it's good.
Yes, this inside-outside argument doesn't hold anymore. I mean, we are increasingly a more global society. We borrow from each other. A lot of other countries have borrowed from us too. So, I mean, that's not the point. I think the larger point is, yes, the majority verdict is what prevails. that is the ultimate essence of democracy. It is also the ultimate essence. That's why constitutional benches are set up, so that the majority verdict prevails. Otherwise, it could have been a single judge bench and a single judge ruling, giving a ruling, and that would have been the final law.
And we must give Dr. Saraf an opportunity to respond to this as well. Yes. Anupam Saraf, do you want to respond? It's your right to respond, as it is your right to dissent in a democracy. Go ahead, Anupam Saraf, please.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that we are confusing majoritarianism with democracy.
Yes.
I think true democracy means that there is right for a minority, even if it's a single person, to express his opinion and to be able to stand by it. And I am delighted that Justice Chandrachud has used this opportunity to express his opinion and express his dissent on what the Aadhaar is. And I think in a similar way, it's important to recognize that you should not, if you're a true democracy, you should not push down the gullets of all the country and all the people, the stand of a majority, just because it happens to be a majority. So I think we need Goenka. I think it's important for you to recognize that inclusiveness does not come by saying that it is about the majority. Inclusiveness comes when you are willing to listen to a minority, even if it is a single person.
Yes.
So I think true leadership is shown by actually accepting that we made mistakes and there is nothing wrong in making mistakes. And if we did make mistakes, we are willing to rectify them. We are willing to ensure that no person shall suffer the Aadhaar, even if the majority view holds that Aadhaar will be made mandatory, even if through the back door. So I think that is an assurance that we call upon you to give. And if you are a true leader, that is your responsibility.
I just want to point out here that Justice Ashok Bhushan has commenced reading his judgment. He says he's broadly in agreement with the majority, although he does dissent in some smaller issues. And we're going to wait for what these smaller issues are. Our correspondent Meenakshi is standing by right now on the lawns of the Supreme Court. She's been inside of the courtroom this entire time while the judgment was being read out. Meenakshi, there were a couple of pointers of confusion. One about the UGC and the NEET exams. That has now been cleared. We understand that Aadhaar is not mandatory for NEET exams either. Could you take us through the broader strokes of the majority judgment that will now hold going forward? Meenakshi.
Well, you know, Faye, at the outset, this is something which the government will be viewing it with a considerable amount of satisfaction, although this is not entirely something which has gone the UIDAI's way or the government's way. Because remember, even the majority view of the
ऐतिहासिक फैसले में आधार एक्ट को कुछ पोर्शंस को स्ट्राइक डाउन किया है, कुछ पोर्शंस को रीड डाउन किया है. वैसे तो पूरे एक्ट को अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल नहीं बोला है, लेकिन ये बोल दिया है कि पहली बात तो कोई निजी कंपनी आधार कार्ड किसी भी चीज़ के लिए नहीं मांग सकती, कोई बैंक नहीं मांग सकता, कोई मोबाइल कंपनी नहीं मांग सकती, कोई एयरलाइन नहीं मांग सकती, कोई स्कूल नहीं मांग सकता. आधार कार्ड सिर्फ सरकारी स्कीम्स जिसमें कि कोई सब्सिडी दी जाती है उसी में मांगा जा सकता है. और उसमें भी किसी भी व्यक्ति का अगर बायोमेट्रिक आइडेंटिफिकेशन फेल करता है तो सिर्फ उस आधार पर उसको उसका जो एंटाइटलमेंट है उस स्कीम में वो डिनाई नहीं किया जा सकता. थोड़ा सा विवाद इस पर हुआ कि ये कानून आधार एक्ट जो कि मनी बिल की तरह लाया गया था कि क्या इसको मनी बिल की तरह लाया जा सकता है कि नहीं, जिसमें मेजॉरिटी ने शायद ये बोला है कि हाँ उसको मनी बिल की तरह लाया जा सकता था, लेकिन ये भी बोला है कि मनी बिल की तरह कोई कानून लाया जा सकता है कि नहीं लाया जा सकता ये सिर्फ स्पीकर नहीं तय कर सकता और स्पीकर का डिसीजन कोर्ट में चैलेंज किया जा सकता है. लेकिन उसमें एक डिसेंटिंग ओपिनियन जस्टिस चंद्रचूड़ की है, जिसमें उन्होंने बोला है कि ये आधार एक्ट मनी बिल की तरह नहीं लाया जा सकता था और इसलिए ये पूरा एक्ट वैसे भी अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल है क्योंकि गलत तरीके से पास किया गया। तो ऑल इन ऑल ये एक बहुत ऐतिहासिक जजमेंट है जिसमें कि आम आदमी को बहुत रिलीफ मिलेगा। पहला रिलीफ तो ये कि इतने सारे ये प्राइवेट लोग आधार को इंसिस्ट कर रहे थे कि भाई आप आधार कार्ड दीजिए, नहीं तो हम आपका बैंक अकाउंट नहीं खोलेंगे, आपका हम एडमिशन नहीं करेंगे, आपको मोबाइल सिम कार्ड नहीं देंगे, आपको हम ट्रैवल नहीं करने देंगे। इस सब को सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने साफ साफ कह दिया है कि कोई ऐसा नहीं मांग सकता और ऐसा मांगना बिल्कुल गैर संवैधानिक होगा।
Sir, the fact that he said that what about the data which is already with private firms? There are lots of firms which already have this data. Has the court said anything about what happens to that?
I think at least Justice Chandrachud has said that this data which has been collected has to be destroyed. I am not sure as to what the majority view on this is. So today the Supreme Court has passed another historic judgment on the Aadhaar Act. They have held several parts of the Aadhaar Act to be unconstitutional. In particular, they have said that no private company, whether it is a telecom company or a bank or a school or an airlines, can ask for Aadhaar Act as a condition for providing any services. They have also said that if biometric identification of a person fails, then he cannot be denied the benefit of any government scheme merely because his biometric identification has failed, if he can establish his identity otherwise. So this is a very major relief that citizens have got. There is some dispute between the judges about whether this Aadhaar Act could have been passed as a money bill. It was passed as a money bill. On this, while the majority view seems to be that yes, it could have been passed as a money bill, though they have also held that whether an act can be passed as a money bill or not is a justiciable issue which the court can decide. It can't be left to the speaker alone. But the minority judgment of Justice Chandrachud, he has delivered a very strong judgment saying that passing this act as a money bill was a fraud on the constitution because you have bypassed the Raj Sabha in the process of passing this act as a money bill. He has also said that all the data that has been collected by way of the Aadhaar card needs to be destroyed. However, exactly what the majority has said on this, I am not sure.
सर, पैन के लिए आधार जरूरी होगा तो बैंक खाते में तो आधार नंबर अपने आप जुड़ जाएगा अब?
नहीं, देखिए पैन खाता तो सिर्फ उसके लिए होता है सरकार के इनकम टैक्स पैन कार्ड तो नहीं, पैन कार्ड आपकी कोई आइडेंटिटी मांग सकते हैं लेकिन आधार कार्ड नहीं मांग सकते आपका।
Sir, Justice Chandrachud has dissented and in very strong words. The fact that he's not in majority, can it have the statements that he's making, the concerns that he has raised, will that have a bearing? Will the government now have to consider that as well? Or where does his dissent stand in this own judgment?
No, his dissent is a very important dissent which makes a very strong case. Firstly, on the fraud that was perpetrated by passing this act as a money bill and thereby bypassing the Raj Sabha. Though the majority may not have agreed with him, but it's a very but the majority also said that yes, whether an act is a money bill can be passed as a money bill or not. Just the Lok Sabha Speaker's decision on that is not decisive. That can be challenged in every case in a court of law, and the court will have to decide whether the act has any relationship to the Consolidated Fund of India or not. So therefore, the dissent will have serious and strong resonance on issues of privacy, on issues of liberty, which are raging in this country. And in any case, even the majority judgment is a very important and strong judgment, giving major relief to people who had been complaining about using Aadhaar for anything and everything, collecting all your information about everything through this Aadhaar and thereby violating your privacy.
All right, if we do have our correspondent Meenakshi with us, I'm going to quickly cut back to Meenakshi. Meenakshi, the main points that we know for sure, which Mr. Bhushan we heard speak from the lawns of the Supreme Court, also talked about no private company, banks, schools, mobile phone companies. Basically, Aadhaar will now only be valid. Or we can see Meenakshi there having a conversation with Prashant Bhushan, trying to get him to speak to... All right, if Meenakshi can hear us, so we'll go back to Meenakshi. But we have a couple of people on the phone line. People have already begun calling in. Sunil Vadera on the phone line from New Delhi. Sunil, go ahead, please.
Hey, superb debate, I must say. And let me first compliment your panelist, Doctor, on his clarification on what democracy really means. It's great to hear people like that. So my compliments to him. You have already raised the issue. Aadhaar was being collected left, right, and center. Even so much so that even some courier company also came in with a packet and he says, "Can you give me your Aadhaar card?" Ridiculous. And it had been taken to the ridiculous heights. And thank God that Supreme Court has finally come up with the judgment that they have come up with. I agree, Justice Chandrachud's very strong judgment. Even though minorities must be heard, I hope, by the government and also taken into account. I was listening to the BJP spokesperson there, who the moment Huffington Post name came, he said, it is foreigners commenting. No, Huffington Post doesn't necessarily mean whites. Huffington Post also has Indians, and it has an Indian office too. So we should not jump to those kind of conclusions. Let's not show that division on the count of people. That's just a friendly advice to people like Mr. Goenka. I'm hoping that all the data collected by the people who have not been authorized now, who have been unauthorized now to collect data by the private company or what, will need to be deleted. Despite, I don't know whether the majority judgment will have it there or not as of today. However, going by the majority judgment and very strong statement of Justice Chandrachud, I think the data will need to be deleted so that it cannot be misused, because almost majority of the people, 95% of the people have already been coerced.
Yes. No. Do you have a question for us, Ms. Sunilji? Do you have a question for us?
The BJP spokesperson, the government spokesperson would be, what does he feel? Will the government be asking, if the judgment doesn't say so specifically, okay, will the government be ensuring that the data collected by the people who were not supposed to collect,
yes,
be deleted?
Okay, so that's a fair question. And Vinny Goenka, this is a question I raised once before. So we do know that there were a lot of private companies, including airlines, that asked for Aadhaar data, which according to this judgment now, I don't know if it can be applied retrospectively, they've all collected data and maintained databases that they have no entitlement to. What can the government do now to get them to destroy or hand over those databases? Is it possible at all, Mr. Goenka?
Yeah, I heard the caller and everybody. So let me answer every question which has been raised till now. When I said I don't give credit to Huffington Post, I said I don't give credit to Huffington Post writer, whoever he is, whether he is Indian or outsider, over the judges of the country. I think I would respect the judges' sentiments more than anybody else, because they matter to me and not a reporter sitting there who does not understand the society. B, as I said, let us wait for the entire judgment to come, and if there is a mention about destroying of the data, then the procedures can be described. Number 3, let me tell you once again, I've been telling on your panel every time, there is nobody collecting your data. It is sent for an authentication.
By breaching certain conditions. And I think on the whole, that this sufficiently protects the citizen, though not completely, largely. And I think on the whole it's a good judgment. Though personally, I'm happy with Justice Chandrachud's judgment striking it down on the ground that it violates the right to privacy.
Exactly.
But you see, this kind of legislation has to be on an experimental basis. You have to see how it works. Later on, there may be certain more amendments made, changes made, a lot of experience we gather. But the citizens' concerns have been largely met by the majority by imposing certain limitations and conditions.
Sir, also as Justice Chandrachud is the only one regarding the entire thing, and also saying the right to privacy might hamper as and not to valid the Aadhaar card. So what are your personal observation regarding, do you think that data linking is possible, sir, like from your researches and all that you've went through?
Well, I don't know about that, but Justice Chandrachud's concerns about the infringement of right to privacy, I think they are very forceful and legitimate. And personally, I prefer his judgments.
Sir, also Section 57 has been read down, sir. So how do
By the majority.
Sir?
By the majority.
Yeah.
So that's good. It's read down to that extent that citizens' concerns and have been met. He has been protected. They've read it down. You see, you don't always strike down a section. If you can read it down, you read it down and make it in accordance with the Constitution.
Sir, regarding last question, sir, Supreme Court says that education has taken us the thumb impression to signature. Now technology has taken us to the signature to thumb impression. So how do you think the laws that are still not appropriate regarding if protection of our data, our privacy is concerned? So how do you think that it will be going with the perennially it will be going together, sir?
Well, we'll have to see how it goes. As I told you, such a legislation is also on an experimental basis. And the LATAP is working. If certain problems emerge, certain deficiencies come to light, they'll be met, I'm sure, with the government. But taken as a whole, so I'm not completely satisfied with the majority judgment. I'm largely satisfied.
So, sir, what is actually barring you from being satisfied, sir?
Because they've not given sufficient importance of right to privacy which Justice Chandrachud has given. I'm very, if I may say so, a votary of the right to privacy. I feel very strongly about it. So to that extent, I'm very much in favor of what Justice Chandrachud has held. But after all, don't strike down legislation of this kind. It's a socio-economic legislation. So I have to see there may be two views on the matter.
Sir, will you be also speaking regarding the SC/ST's judgment that has come today, sir?
What's that?
Sir,
the quota?
Sir, ST's reservation in promotion, sir.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court has read out that 5-bench judge refuses to refer the Nagra judgment on the large.
All right, Mr. Vinay Goenka, forgive me, we had to go across there. That was Soli Sarabji, former Attorney General, who was making a statement. But specifically, and we're now getting messages and calls as well from audience who are asking this one specific question. If there is a private company, not the government, but a private company that has collected Aadhaar numbers for whatever reason under whatever rules, will there be an attempt, or can there be an attempt of delinking made in the future, or is it impossible? Technologically speaking, is it impossible to retrieve that data or get them to delete that data?
No audio.
Opinion. When 5 judges speak the same line, that is the best thing. But when the majority also speaks, 3 out of the 5 speaks out of the same thing, it becomes an order. But I get wake-up call, I get little uncomfortable, even one makes a stringent message or a comment on that. So when Justice Chandrachud makes any comment, it wakes me up. So I did not say that okay, this does not concern to us because this may not be a majority judgment. So that's the overall philosophical understanding about this. Now coming on the technical part, I've been talking about this Always. Even the technical experts also talked about this. The data is not stored at third party, neither it has been stored with anybody who's doing a validation. The data goes to the server where it has been validated, a validation comes back, and that's it. The core data does not get replicated, it is not on the internet, it is not a learning algorithm. It's just a IME software. IME software means it says that yes, this is Vineet Goenka, nothing beyond that. Not the bio data has been given out. That has been already spent. And the judges, 3 judges have already spoken about this. They have passed their observations on privacy, they have passed on their information, their observations on the protection, they have also passed their observation on the validity of money bill. So what I think is the case raised here, we don't have to come and become super judges over them, what they have done. So more or less, this is a good thing. And in case you have a concern whether there is a data been held by any private party, bring it to the notice of the authorities. We will check whether how did they collect it, because collection itself was not permitted till now. So the question of eliminating does not come.
Well, I can tell you for sure that various airlines were collecting Aadhaar numbers for their frequent flyer programs. I can tell you for sure that schools were collecting Aadhaar numbers from students.
It's not data. So, yeah, the number collection is not data collection, right? When you have a number, your PAN card number or your Aadhaar number, when you put it in the system, does not give your biometrics, madam. So please differentiate between number and the data. So
okay, so you're saying, hang on. So you're saying basically,
so you don't have to worry about that, and let us wait.
Okay, so if you've just given your number, Aadhaar number to somebody, there's nothing to worry about. That's something that you're comfortable with, and there's no need to panic about that situation, is what you're saying, Vineet Goenka. If I'm not mistaken.
I don't think so. Your bank account allows you to withdraw. And see, I'll come this. Your bank account does not permit you to withdraw money because you have an Aadhaar number. It also requires something called as OTP authentication.
Right. Okay. I understood what
you're saying. So how do you bring that? So this precedent has been made, and I think these all things have been now they have been rest because the judgment is coming out. And why are trying to discuss what was discussed on the first day of the argument there in the court? 38 days they have talked about all these things, and see what the majority of the judges have already talked about this. This can go.
Okay, no. To be fair, Vineet Goenka, I'll keep bringing up things that my audience want to talk about. So why are you trying to discuss this? Is not going to make me stop.
And you should also bring in people like Anupam Sarafji, who may have a different voice, even if it is not a valid voice, even if it is an unwanted voice. It is he has a right to come out in the democracy. He should speak about it, and we are all here to answer him, and we are here to answer everybody who calls. But to the majority, people should
very
also
benevolent of you, Mr. Goenka. But let me point out that Anupam Saraf's voice is not just. It is, not just what it is very valid. All voices in a democracy are valid. All dissent in democracy is valid. We also have Vikas Gupta who joins us in our Noida studio. Mr. Gupta, thank you. Forgive me for not coming to you earlier while we were waiting for updates from the Supreme Court. But we now have, this is where it is, 4 out of the 5 judges seem to have agreed on most counts. It's just the one judge who is in dissent, which is Justice Chandrachud. Mr. Vikas Gupta, the points that Justice Chandrachud are making, very, very strong, very, very stringent points of view. A lot of people seem to agree with what Justice Chandrachud is saying. Should there be a closer introspection done based on what Justice Chandrachud is saying, or will it, or is it just, at this point, one judge's opinion?
Even if it's a one judge opinion, let us see the whole judgment in totality, What Supreme Court by this delivering this judgment has struck a balance. On the one side it has upheld the constitutional validity of the act, and on the other hand it has protected the interest of the petitioners which they have raised, barring linking it with filing your income tax return. Now you don't need to share your Aadhaar details with anybody. Even if it's not only private parties, even with state-run banks also. So there is nothing much for the government to cheer about at this point in time, that it's been a total victory. For them, it's more of the upholding of the constitutional validity of the act. Secondly, only for the purposes of filing your income tax return, Aadhaar linkage to Aadhaar is mandatory. Otherwise, the common man goes scot-free, and that is what the fight was all about. Not sharing your details with private parties and the parties which were not concerned at all. Secondly, yes, I would agree to that point as far as government is concerned, that transferring direct subsidy to the ultimate beneficiary, I think that's a welcome step. But on the contrary, the majority judgment also says so, that not because if there is not verification, you can't deny him that services. So I think it's been quite a balanced judgment, and it's been a victory of a common man also.
Right. Let me just go back to the lawns of the Supreme Court where Meenakshi is still standing by. Meenakshi, if you can hear us. Now that all of the judges are done reading out, portions of their judgments, where does it stand? Is it true that Justice Chandrachud is the only one in dissent and the other four seem to largely agree?
Well, Faye, at the outset, a few things really need highlighting, and as Prashant Bhushan there was available in the Supreme Court to address the media, perhaps what has been lost somewhere in this din of Supreme Court upholding the overall constitutional validity of the Aadhaar Act is this, that it has not given a clear home run to the Government of India and UIDAI either. By striking down certain very key provisions of the Aadhaar Act, it has ensured that the gathering of data which was being indulged in on grassroots levels, on everyday spheres of life, unhinged. We've heard from UIDAI and several defenses from the government that this kind of collection of data was not permissible by law, but at the same time it was happening on ground and there was no bar or check, and these private entities would go on to do it in a completely unabashed manner. So now that is going to have to stop, Faye. And that apart, even the earlier judgment of the Supreme Court from 2015 had pretty much laid down the same principles that has been today again affirmed by the majority view. This is 3 judges out of the 5-judge composition. Now, even in 2015, the Supreme Court had put it on record that Aadhaar is mandatory only for the purposes of availing public welfare scheme benefits. Aadhaar is not mandatory for other aspects of everyday life. But in spite of that, we had seen the directions of Honorable Supreme Court of India, that juncture being completely defied on ground. And of course, the later part happened in 2016 when the Aadhaar Act was passed, because the argument thus far was there is no statute law as such as the Aadhaar Act, which till 2015 had been passed. Now, it is Honorable Justice D.Y. Chandrachud. His sharply differing position is not something which can be brushed off very lightly, Faye, because remember, he is to be Chief Justice of India. He is to assume charge as Chief Justice of India soon in the foreseeable future. So for a to be Honorable Chief Justice of India to have such a disparate opinion in this 5-judge bench composition also assumes a significant amount of import. And it is not just a mild difference of opinion. It is completely disparate, sharply differing position that Honorable Justice D.Y. Chandrachud has taken on the constitutional validity of the Act itself, the manner of passage, the very fact that it was passed as a money bill, according to Honorable Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, is something which invalidates the very existence of the Act. So these are very, very sharply differing positions, and we have seen in the Supreme Court in the past, Faye, be that in the 377 case, of course, that was a 2-judge bench composition which set aside the 2007 judgment of the Honorable Delhi High Court, and subsequent events happened. The right to privacy judgment happened, and then we saw the Supreme Court again step in at a later juncture in 2018 and render the earlier judgment as infructuous. Of course, there will be demands for a relook at this particular judgment as well, Faye, given the fact that a to-be Chief Justice of India has had such a sharply differing position from a 3 judges majority opinion.
Right, Meenakshi, they're bringing us live updates from the Supreme Court lawns there. Meenakshi has been bringing us updates all day on the Aadhaar judgment. A quick recap for our viewers who have just joined us. The Supreme Court's 5-judge bench has given us its verdict on the Aadhaar Act. Now, there are various parts of the Aadhaar Act that was examined by the Supreme Court, but this is the portion that applies to us most clearly. You are no longer required to submit your Aadhaar number or anything Aadhaar linked to your bank account. You are no longer required to link your bank account with your Aadhaar. You are no longer required to link your phone or your SIM card with your Aadhaar. You are no longer required to submit Aadhaar to any private company. No private company can request for your Aadhaar information, and if they make such a request, feel free in the name of the Supreme Court to turn them down. You are also, you are not required to make an Aadhaar for your child at all. This can be done voluntarily with the parents' permission. Schools are not allowed to ask for this. Examination centers, whether that is NEET or CBSE or any other examination center, is not allowed to ask for this. It can only be asked for based on when you are receiving a subsidy from the government, which means a subsidized gas cylinder, or if you're receiving subsidized ration from a ration shop, or if you are receiving any other kind of subsidy. You will have to submit your Aadhaar for PAN cards. In the meantime, the Supreme Court's majority of that bench seems satisfied with the infrastructure that has been put in place by the government for the safety of the data, the fact that the data is in fact safe and there is nothing to worry about there, that there is no room for duplication in terms of Aadhaar numbers, and that it will in fact look after the weakest section of society that is in requirement of help from the government. The Supreme Court was also of the opinion that nobody should be denied any sort of ration or help from the government based on either the lack of Aadhaar or the presence of Aadhaar. This is where we stand at this point, and I'm going to do a quick round for all of our guests on the panel as to what you believe is the most important part of this judgment, as we've heard everything so far. Vinay, you first. The most important part of the judgment, the biggest takeaway for you. For me, the takeaway is I can choose not to link, which is what I think most of our audience was waiting for up till now. That if you don't want to link, you don't have to. You can choose not to link. It's no longer compulsory.
Yeah, like I said during the 377, number one, thank God we have a Supreme Court, because it's doing more course correction than possibly we've had for decades. 2, it gives you a choice. 3, it recognizes the concerns that have been raised over the last couple of years, more vociferously in the last 1 year, that there was something wrong with the extent to which Aadhaar was being used and being pushed, including private entities. And the third and the fourth point is that it also allows space to appreciate and understand that there is a need for a robust mechanism in India which provides for identity and transfer of benefits as well. And I think that's also equally valid for us to say that there are a lot of naysayers who are perhaps asking or expecting a complete demolition of this exercise, and I think that's not the solution either. I mean, we cannot have a situation where we say that in 2006 and 7, when there was no Aadhaar, we were a better off country than we are today. I don't think there's any argument for that. But the courts has very subtly and very fine line, they've drawn a very fine line on how much and no further can you go.
Ritesh?
Now that in various segments that the Aadhaar is compulsory for various services, I would request that UIDAI make sure that it is used only and only for authentication and not for identification. It's really creating a lot of trouble, and especially we are seeing a lot of cases in identity theft, and hence they should now start having infrastructure wherein I can go and authenticate and it says, okay, this is Ritesh Bhatia and now you can let him in.
Yes, Anubhav Saraf, what according to you was the most important part of the judgment so far?
I think the most important fact is that the dissenting judgment by Justice Chandrachud, and I think it is time to contemplate on what it implies for all the Aadhaar data, all the Aadhaars that have been issued so far, because what it implies when you say that it is a fraud on the Constitution of India is all the data that you have collected so far is a fraud on the whole of the country, and therefore it is definitely a national security issue for the country. So therefore I think it is important to ensure that we have an investigation into why this project was allowed to propagate itself to the extent that it has. Hello?
Yes, in fact, I want to ask this question of Mr. Matthew
why this
Thomas.
Project was allowed to propagate its...
Mr. Matthew Thomas, in fact, I understand, is going to file a review petition. Mr. Thomas, is that true? Mr. Matthew Thomas, a review petition from you?
Yes, I will file a review petition.
Okay.
Because I believe that the majority judgment is wrong, because they have not read the contract. And I will also say this to Vineet Goenka. I do not know whether he has read the contract. Now, if he has read the contract, he will understand that the entire data is being handed over to foreign agencies. It is not just the collection of the data or keeping it here, but the entire data is being handed over to foreign agencies. That's my plea. And so Justice Chandrachud is absolutely right. It's a fraud on the Constitution. It's totally unconstitutional. He has understood it fairly well, but possibly he has not understood the biometrics aspect of it. The biometrics does not give you a unique identity. That one must understand that. And no law or Supreme Court judgment can reverse scientific or mathematical truths. I'd also like to read to you one part of the contract. It's clause 1.4 of Annexure E. It says the purpose of this contract is to give government a clear view of India's population and enable it to track. In no uncertain terms, the contract says that the purpose is surveillance, is tracking, and all the other things of subsidies, etc., is just a facade. The second thing in the contract is, this is Annexure Annexure E, clause 3.2. It says avoidance of vendor lock-in. It admits that the UID has no control over what's happening. Let me read it out. In the area of biometrics, proprietary algorithms. They're using proprietary algorithms of foreign companies. And data representations are perhaps required to achieve performance and accuracy requirements of the UID. The system is designed such that these algorithms and data representation form a black box. A black box means the UIDI has no control, nor they don't know what is happening in it. Now, coming back to Mr. Vineet Goenka, I would request him that he has accused Justice Chandrachud of relying on foreigners, which is Huffington Post. Let him say, who are these foreign companies? L1 Identity.
No, but I don't believe that that's what he said. He was accusing Anupam Saraf of relying on foreigners.
Please go back. I would request you to play my record, please. Can you play by the record? Sir, don't accuse me, sir.
You know, also,
sir,
I mean, okay, one second. While we have run out of time and I don't have the time for this sort of
squabbling. I respect your age and your experience. Don't misquote me,
I just want to point out a couple of things.
No, but he's quoted me. So please play the tape again. I have never spoken that, sir. So please stand corrected. I would request him to stand corrected, please. Sir, please stand corrected.
All right. So I just want to make it clear here that Vineet Goenka was talking about Anupam Saraf relying on foreign sources of information and not the courts. And secondly, even the Huffington Post article that was being referred to here was written by Rachna Karya, who was an Indian journalist, not by any sort of foreign journalist. So even Vineet Goenka here has misunderstood where the Huffington Post article came from. But this is where we are. In conclusion, as we stand, this is the judgment that we've received from the Supreme Court so far. It does, of course, uphold our right to choose in a democracy. If you don't want to link your Aadhaar card, you don't have to. Stay with Mirror now for more news and updates.